Hey, welcome to another episode of Rough Rants, the show where we just talk about kind of generally whatever we want to talk about in a not so smooth format. I'm your host, Preston, and today we're revisiting the world of the Star Trek Enterprise with episode 2, Fight or Flight. This episode was kind of meh, to be perfectly honest. It kind of opens in an apt kind of way where the comm officer Hoshi, gotta write those names down. I'm terrible with names, but starts off with Hoshi looking at a slug, and yeah, that's how they wanted to kick this episode off. Thrilling. Turns out that they went to a planet and discovered a slug-like life form and just decided to scoop it up and take it with them with no real objective, it seemed like. I would assume if they were going to take the slug, it would be like, oh, hey, let's, dissect it or, just study it in general. But it almost kind of felt like their pet. Hoshi is looking at it, and then Dr. Phlox, it's just like, do you want to speak slug? And Hoshi goes, yeah, I really do. Like, she keeps referring to the slug as a she. And Phlox points out, like, well, one, we don't know if it's male or female, so there's not really much point of putting, gender connotations upon it. Also, from my understanding, is that most slugs and arthropods in general, I'm pretty sure slugs are arthropods, don't really have a sex. They're like hermaphrodites. At least they have both sex organs, I assume. But it's space slug, so I guess that's whatever. But yeah, no, apparently they went off screen, went to this planet, just picked up a random slug, and it's dying because they don't have no idea how to take care of it. And the doctor's just like, well, we can just, like, feed it to my bat creature thing that I have. And Hoshi is really attached to the slug. And then Trip, that's his name, right? Yep, Trip. Boring dick guy. He comes in, and apparently everyone is really stir crazy right now because they haven't found any intelligent life, going through the vastness of space. They haven't found life in, a day. So clearly, like, what's even the point? And then we get the opening theme song again, which, yeah, it still doesn't really fit this show. I mean, it opens up with just, it's been a long time, going on to anywhere, going down a long, long time. Yeah, just perfect for Star Trek. But then we open up properly with the show, showing Malcolm and Mayweather testing out the guidance systems for their missiles. And it turns out that they just left Earth without getting any of that prepped. Like, they're just like, all right, we're just going to leave. Like, hope we don't fight anything or run into any hostile life forms, or, we're kind of screwed. Which, litany of problems with that. Mostly, why would you do that? This is a spaceship. Typically, when you have a spaceship, you want to make sure everything is running at 120% capacity, and that includes the weapon system. And then also, like, you can make the argument of, like, well, they don't know that they we're going to run into any hostile life forms. They're a peaceful exploration, craft. Here's the problem with that. In the first episode, they established that the first race they were going to go interact with was the Klingons. who they were flat out warned that is a very, very hostile race and will potentially try to kill them. So the fact that they didn't have their weapon systems ready to go for them is really dumb. But yeah, there's an issue. Malcolm is just super gung ho, going like, yeah, we need to get these systems up and ready to go, so that if we find anything, we can blow it up. And like I said, everyone's kind of stir crazy. Apparently, it's been 2 weeks, and they haven't found any intelligent life to make contact with, which is just unacceptable for the crew. Like, they should have at least run into 4 at this point. I mean, come on, it's just basic math. And it's actually kind of funny because Archer is talking, he's in his bunk, and then T'Pol, the Vulcan lead scientist, comes in, like knocks on the door, and he goes, come in, and then the second she walks in and starts to talk, he immediately goes like, shh. And apparently there's like this squeaking noise. I didn't hear it when she walked in, so he just kind of makes, Archer look like a dick, because he kind of is. But he's just like, shh, I hear a squeaking noise. And he's like, again, getting stir crazy because they haven't really done anything. And he's listening to the ground, and he's just going like, I think I hear a squeak, and we'll have to like rip up the floorboards to see what it is. And T'Pol is just like, yeah, that would suck, but we're exploring, and she's just kind of talking in general. And he's going like, he's asking her, do the Vulcans have any information on the star system they're going through, which is uncharted? And she goes, no, because we didn't go there. Why would we? And he points out, like, well, why not? Like, how dare you not be able to explore the entirety of space? You should have gone in there. And she points out there's no logical reason to do that, so why would we do that? So he's bored, and she also points out that like only one, and I think she said 43,000 planets will have intelligent life on it, which sounds absurdly high because the universe is kind of big. And when I hear like, again, 1 out of 43,000 planets, there's a crap ton of planets in the universe. So that would just seem like it would be bustling with life everywhere. But he's annoyed by the fact that they haven't, again, found intelligent life within 5 minutes. So T'Pol leaves, and then Hoshi comes in, and she has a request that just makes her so endearing. It turns out that because in her training she was on the port side of the ship, the stars would move in a certain way outside of her window, which helped her sleep. But she's on the other side, so she's having a hard time sleeping, and she's just like, she can't have any of that. And she asks if she can switch with another crewmate. And Archer's like, I don't care, that's fine. So they keep flying, and they stop in the middle of an asteroid field, and they come down. Archer's bored, and he comes down to the weapons bridge, and where Malcolm and Mayweather are. And he's like, hey, what's up? And they're basically going like, oh, here's the issue we're having. The targeting system's off by like 3 meters. And like the projected algorithms that are testing out like how effective these missiles will be at hitting their target, it keeps saying we're going to miss. And Archer just goes like, well, let's just stop and we'll blow something up. And so they decide to stop in the middle of nowhere, and they shoot some missiles, which is really dumb because you're in space. You don't know when you're going to be able to resupply on missiles. Like, you don't waste those things. There's a reason why there's a computer algorithm to test out if these will be effective or not. And they're like, nah, let's just shoot some asteroids. Who cares? We got plenty of them. So they shoot the asteroids and they keep missing. And in one time, they actually missed so bad that the missile ricochets more or less off of an asteroid and heads straight back to them. And they just kind of stare at it for like a good minute and are like, oh, like what's going on with that? And I'm just like, you need to move out of the way. Like, seriously. Or you're going to blow up. You're going to blow yourself up, which would be apt for this crew. And I guess they hit a detonator button or something, and the missile gets blown up. And Malcolm's like, okay, I think I've discovered the problem. I'm going to recalibrate this thing, and it's going to take a hot minute to do it. And Archer's just like, okay, well, how long will it take? And he's like, oh, it'll take like a day. And Archer's like, oh, well, we don't have time for that. Like, we got places to be. Like, I don't care if this could literally determine if the entire crew lives or dies. We're going. So, so they keep flying, and then they get readings of a ship, and it's not moving. It's just completely dead in the water, essentially. And they're like, well, it could be anything, so we'll go check it out. So they go check out the ship, and they're hailing it, and they're not getting a response back. And what's hilarious to me is they have literally zero idea what race this ship is from. And like they're not getting any communications whatsoever. The ship is not moving. There's like they even scan do like some minor preliminary scans, and it's just like barely powered up. Like it's like on power safe mode essentially, which is a huge red flag right there. It's just like, oh, are they like, crippled and dead in the water kind of thing, or like what's going on? But his first response is like, oh, hey, let's try to make communication. That makes sense. What doesn't make sense is he goes and his communication is literally just basically like almost like a business pitch to them. He's just like, hey, we're from Earth. It's located here essentially, and it'd be really cool if you would come and visit us sometime. And I'm just like, what would happen if this race is evil? Like, and it's a world conquering, militia or something. It's just like, oh, hey, you're from Earth? Great. Now we know our next target. Thanks, Archer. Like, they have no idea whatsoever about this race or this ship or anything. And that's your opening line. Here we are. Like, no. And again, I was just thinking, like, why isn't your first communication attempt like, hey, are you guys okay? Like, is your ship damaged? Anything like that. But they don't get a response back. And they go a little closer to the ship, and it turns out that the hangar ports have damage to them, and it looks like they've been shot, basically. So it's like, oh, okay, so they most likely have been attacked or something. But they have no idea. And T'Pol is like, well, we should just probably leave because they could be angry by the fact that we're there. Which is a dick move because, again, what would happen if they were just dead in the water and their communications are down? Like, it's like, oh yeah, we should just leave them to die, essentially. So I thought that was kind of a dick move on T'Pol's part, but Archer is also really dumb because T'Pol points out, like, we shouldn't do a bioscan because that would be considered rude, apparently. And why would that be considered rude? Like, if they did have issues with that, you could easily just explain, hey, we saw that you were just here in space, you weren't communicating with us whatsoever, and we see that you have damage on your ship, which implies that you've been attacked. We were just checking to make sure everything was okay. Like, I think that would have been a significant a decent explanation as to why you violated their personal space by doing a basic scan. But he does the bioscan, and there are life forms on the ship, or organic material, I guess would be the best way to describe it. And he goes, okay, we're going to go on the ship. Like, just right there. He's like, all right, we're going to go on the ship. Like, not going to check anything else. And T'Pol and everyone else is just like, hey, there's like 17 different things we should do before that, like, to try to communicate with them, because we have only done apparently one type of communication attempt, and there's like 13 more. But he's like, nope, we're just gonna go. Like, we're just gonna go on that ship. Who cares? Like, could be a plague ship, essentially, where it could be full of aliens that have some type of space disease that will literally rip our insides to shreds. But yeah, I mean, I'm bored. That's essentially why he's so gung-ho about doing this. It's not because he legitimately thinks that the people on the ship could be in danger. He's just bored. And he tells Malcolm and Hoshi to get ready because they're going to come along. And he's walking, and he runs into Trip, and Trip is, again, he's the engineer, which I do not get why he is the engineer, but he's going like, man, I should be going with you, man. This is our first possible, interaction with intelligent life. Why am I not going? And Archer points out the obvious reasons of, you are a engineer. I don't need an engineer. I need a communications expert and potentially, security. And Trip tries to make some bogus excuses like, well, what happens if, you need to defrag the blah, blah, blah. And again, Archer's just like, you are in engineering. You're going to stay on engineering because if something happens, we kind of need you to make sure the ship is working. And Trip makes the dumbest leap in logic, where he goes like, well, I didn't join this crew to be stuck in engineering the whole time. I want to go see the aliens. And I'm just like, then you should have picked a different career, because your whole job is in the name. You are an engineer. Why would you realistically ever leave engineering? So he's butthurt about not being able to go, and Archer's getting ready, and then Hoshi comes into his cabin, and she starts going like, hey, Captain, do I have to go on this mission? The spacesuits make me claustrophobic. Like, I'm not really feeling this one. Like, can't you just use the universal translator? Yeah, Hoshi is definitely not endearing herself onto me. Like, every other word that comes out of her mouth so far has been just whining, and she clearly doesn't handle stress well whatsoever. And he points out again that hey, if the universal translator doesn't work, we're kind of screwed, so you have to be with us to make contact, which is the whole point of her being there. If they were just going to use the universal translator, what's the point of having a linguistic expert? So she just basically sulks off, like, I guess we gotta go on this mission. Like, no one told me that I would have to actually do stuff. So, um, her, Malcolm, and Archer are getting ready to go. They're getting their suits on, and Malcolm wants to essentially bring an entire arsenal of weapons with him. And Archer's like, we're just going to bring some basic phasers, basically. And again, Hoshi's like, oh yeah, I know these weapons, these types of weapons, and Archer hands her the new phaser, and he's like, oh, it's essentially the exact same thing. And again, she just starts pouting, basically. She's like, what? I have to use something new? Like, okay. So they go onto the ship, and again, like, Malcolm is so gung ho about causing as much destruction apparently as he can. Like, this is completely different than the previous episode where he barely did anything. And this one, I guess they wanted to overcompensate. They overcompensated a little bit because he's just like, I want to blow everything up, because they make it to the hull and they're trying to find a way to in. And he's like, oh, I'll just use C4 essentially to blow open the hatch. And Archer's just like, well, no, there's literally this thing right here. And he turns a knob and the hatch opens up instantly. So it's just, so yeah, that's just kind of goofy. So they go into the ship and they're, sci-fiing it up, scanning stuff, and the ship is basically dead in the water again. Has barely any power whatsoever. And they didn't discover that there's like essentially blood on, the floors and the walls, and they're like, okay, something definitely happened. And they go down to where the bio signs are, and they hear this noise, and they see like these tubing. There's like these tubes hooked up to, like, it kind of looks like a dialysis machine. And they're like, what is this? And then Hoshi just starts screaming like crazy. And then they look up and there's like a bunch of people, alien people, hanging up upside down from the ceilings. And they have the tubes running out of their necks. And it's pumping the blood out of them. And Hoshi's freaking out. And Archer's just like, what's going on? And they're just kind of like, a little dumbfounded, which makes sense. It's like, hey, you just found a bunch of dead bodies. So they're like, and they scan the pump device, and it turns out it's like recent. It's like, it's not part of the ship. It's like someone purposefully put it there, obviously. But it was just recently put there, and T'Pol points out, like, hey, if it was just put there and it's pumping these guys' blood out, that means most likely whoever set this thing up is going to come back eventually to get the blood. So we should get out of here, which makes sense. So they get back onto the ship, and T'Pol's like, we need to get out of here. Like, this could be very dangerous. And Archer throws a fit, going like, what? Like, why would we leave? Like, they could come back at any time. Clearly we should stay. And that's it. That's his reasoning, is like, we should just stay. And again, T'Pol points out the obvious of, like, they came here, they're clearly hostile because they just killed a bunch of people, and your crew could be next if you stay here. Like, we need to leave. So Archer decides, okay, you got a point. So they leave, they go back into hyperspeed, and they're resuming course. And then they're kind of walking around, and Hoshi is basically, again, throwing a fit, talking to Phlox, checking up on the slug, and the slug, again, is not doing well. Like, it's about to die, essentially. It's not eating or anything. And Hoshi's just like, oh, well, maybe we can drop it off somewhere. Like, clearly, it's supposed to be like a metaphor for her. Like, it's not doing well in this new environment, so it should probably go back. And I found it funny too, because she's like, well, we should find a new planet that would be able to sustain the slug. And I'm just thinking, like, you're saying that you should introduce an alien species to another planet? Like, what? That is beyond stupid. Like, I would get to a degree to take it back to its home planet and drop it back off. I mean, if you had the time, I assume. Like, but she's like, no, we should just find a new planet and drop it off. And I'm just like, what if it's pregnant? Like, if it's about to lay, which could be why it's not eating, is it's not moving or eating because it's getting ready to lay eggs or something. If you drop it off on a foreign planet, again, you could be introducing an invasive species that could irreparably damage the ecosystem of that planet. But she's like, no, we should just drop it off. And again, she's just complaining about the fact that she had to go on this away mission and like, oh my God, no one told me I might see dead bodies. Like, that's just unacceptable. Again, like, what were you expecting? You got on a ship whose whole thing was you are exploring the unknown. Like, you have to expect the unexpected, and honestly, dead people is not really the unexpected. You're gonna see quite a bit of that in a exploration mission. But she's complaining, and Phlox is basically saying, like, you should probably just be a teacher at this point because you clearly can't handle, the exploration part of this exploration mission, which he is 100% correct. And she's just like, no, the captain needs me. And he's like, all right, whatever. And we cut to everyone eating in the dining hall, and we've learned that Phlox is kind of a creeper. Like, he's talking with Trip, and Trip is talking about like how he was bored and like how he wanted to go see Intelligent Life and whatnot. And Phlox is like, oh no, I've been having a grand old time because I'm seeing so many new things, and like on my planet, we don't talk during dinner because it's considered a waste of time and all this stuff. And he's like, all right, whatever. And we learned that Phlox is kind of a creeper because he's like talking about like what he's been doing. Like, he's been like kind of stalking people, and he's like making these notes of like way too personal stuff. Like, he's like, oh yeah, when this person goes and works out, she smells like this. Like, he has actively went and smelled her. And then he like talks about like this other person's like eating habit schedule, I think. Like, he's, again, this is like stalker territory. And then he points out to these two people where he's like, yeah, you see those two people over there? I'm pretty sure they're about to mate. And then he goes, I wonder if they'll let me watch. Like, completely sincere. So I was like, okay, well, Phlox is a creeper, but what you gonna do? So then it shows Archer, Trip, and T'Pol, and they're in Archer's cabin, and they're talking, and they're having dinner, and basically there's so much tension in the air where, like, you could tell Archer's just pissed that they left, and he then like basically blows up and is like, well, we shouldn't have left because it wasn't the right thing to do. And he's like going, and he points out again, like, T'Pol is pointing out so many correct things. Like, he's going like, we have no idea what these aliens were. We don't know if they were hostile. We don't know when the people that killed them was going to come back, which could have easily resulted in us dying as well, which, yeah, is accurate. Their weapon system is malfunctioning, so you don't exactly want to go in with an empty gun, essentially. and all this stuff that is 100% accurate. And even Trip is kind of like, kind of on her side a little bit. And Archer just makes the argument of like, well, what would have happened if they were Vulcans or humans? Like, wouldn't you want them to, someone to take the bodies down and, try to find their homes and bury them kind of thing? Which I get the sentiment, but again, it's just they don't. I don't think the writers understand the scope of the scale of like what they're doing, because this isn't Earth. They're not like, oh yeah, if we walk like 50 feet in one direction, we'll find a village or something and we can, communicate with them. It's like, no, you're in the vastness of space. Like, there's an infinite amount of possibilities of where this ship came from. There is no guarantee whatsoever that you would ever find their home planet. And again, if let's say you left and then the other ship, like, you did find their race, their home planet, I think they would understand of like, hey, we had no idea where you guys came from, and we're pretty sure that we were in danger, so we had to bail. I think they would have understood. But nope, he's just like, oh, and he like, I also love that last episode. He's like, oh, I have to be less prejudice against Vulcans. But immediately when he's talking about this, he starts going on a tirade of like, Vulcans don't understand empathy and, these moral conundrums and whatnot because they're Vulcans. And then he goes like, and humans have a moral compass that's pretty good, and I can't believe I steered, I deviated from it. And he hails Mayweather and tells him to basically turn around. We're going to go back. Yeah. So they head back, and his plan is he's going to go onto the back on the ship. He's going to take Trip, and he's going to take Phlox. He's going to take Phlox so he can see exactly what was going on with the pumps and, how they died and whatnot. And then he's going to have Trip go over there and see if he can, like, get the communications system up so they can try to hail their home planet. And then Hoshi also goes along with him to basically set up the communications. So they go... and they go and they take down one of the corpses, and Phlox is telling them that, like, basically what happened was the reason why they were killed and are being pumped was because they secrete this solution from their glands that is essentially like an aphrodisiac / like used for like medical purposes. So it's essentially like poachers killed these aliens to, like get rhino horns kind of thing. And Phlox also points out that this substance is very similar to our adrenal glands, and we give off a similar type of fluid. So, hint, hint, what's going to happen. So then Trip is on the bridge of the ship. He gets the communications up and running. And again, the entire time, Hoshi's just complaining, just like, like, I can't handle this. And I also love this part too, where Trip is like trying to comfort her and says like, oh, you've never had like your shot. Like, she's like, oh, I can't handle the stress. I should be the best, but I'm not. I'm clearly not. I'm not cut out for this. And Archer needs a good communications officer. And Trips goes like, oh no, you're like the best, bro. Like, you just need your opportunity. And I'm like, she had her opportunity like 3 times in the past 2 episodes, and in each time she's kind of proven she's not cut out for the field work. She kind of sucks. So yeah, no, sorry, I agree with her. She should really go back to Earth. But again, they're just like, well, yeah, like, we'll never know kind of thing. And they get the communications up, and she's able to get like the universal translator to kind of sort of work. and she sends out a SOS signal back to presumably the source of where their ship came from. And as they're doing this, surprisingly, the Enterprise scans that the rogue ship has returned. The poachers essentially have come back, and the weapon system's still not ready. And they tell Archer, and Archer's like, oh, well, guess we got to run back to the ship. So they run back to the little docking ship, fly back, and unsurprisingly, the poachers don't really care about the whole exploration thing and just start opening fire on the Enterprise. And they end up knocking out their engines, and they're dead in the water. And surprisingly, and they try to shoot at the ship with their missiles, and it doesn't work. Like, either through a combination of they basically miss, and also the enemy ship's shields are way stronger, so they're out of luck, and they're dead in the water. And like, the entire time I'm just like, yeah, Archer, maybe you should have listened to Paul. Like, this was kind of a dumb idea. But then, fortunately for the Enterprise, another ship shows up, and it's from the same alien race of the dead crew. And they get hailed, and Archer orders Hoshi to tell them that, we've discovered the ship, and the ship that is attacking us is the poachers, and we need your help. And she runs it through the universal translator, and it's sent over to the aliens. And the aliens point, and it turns out that, like, it's not working well. It's like garbled non-speech, essentially. Like, it's only like pieces of it are, to be understood by the aliens. And they end up actually pissing off the aliens because they think that they were the ones that killed the ship. That killed the crew on the ship. And the entire time, Hoshi's just flipping out, going like, oh my god, I don't know what I'm doing. And it was also funny too, because Archer's like yelling at her, going like, you need to figure this out. You need to be able to do this, this, and this. And she's like, I don't know if I can. Like, this is really hard, like, this isn't like Spanish. Like, I have to, there's so many syllables and whatnot. And he goes like, you're the only one. Communicate with them. And I'm like, this is an entirely new language. Like, you can't just pull a language out of your butt. Like, if I hear a couple words in Italian, that does not equate to I can speak Italian. It just means I've heard a couple of words and I might know, like, some of the syllables and whatnot. But the words themselves, I have no idea. Like, you can't, and especially on the fly in like 10 seconds. But of course, this works out. Hoshi ends up being able to more or less perfectly communicate with the alien ship. They understand, and they attack the poachers. And it was also kind of funny too, because the Enterprise is able to kind of float off a little bit, and they're like, fire a missile. Like, we've got the targeting system back up and running, and it's working fine now. And Archer's like, fire a missile at him, and they shoot like a piece of the ship, and they're like, yeah, we contributed. And then the alien spaceship blows up the poachers with one shot. And I'm just like, yeah, you guys totally contributed in that one. If it wasn't for you, like, we would have all been dead. But yeah, they end up communicating with the friendly aliens, and they exchange some information, and then it turns out they stopped at this one planet and are going to drop off the slug. The slug that is the metaphor for Hoshi. Yeah, the metaphor slug. They just found a random planet, and they're just like, all right, we're going to drop it off. Again, invasive species, but who cares? Like, and as she's dropping it off, she's just like, hey, I know it's going to be hard, but you need to adapt to survive. You're a strong girl, to the slug. And Yep, and then they leave. And that's the end of the episode. Yeah, I didn't really like this episode. It was, again, kind of fell into the everyone's kind of being a dick. Hoshi is annoying. A lot of the characters are making stupid decisions based off of their wants. Like, I get, again, like exploration, you got to take risk, whatnot, but there's a difference between I am taking a calculated risk and I am being a colossal idiot. And these characters are kind of being colossal idiots. They end up making it out in the end unscathed for the most part, but they wouldn't have been in these situations if they would have, you know, done this intelligent thing. So, yep, that was episode 2 of Star Trek Enterprise. I'm gonna keep on watching the show, see how it progresses. I definitely hope that the characters get at least a little bit more likable. So far, they aren't very endearing. The most endearing character to me so far is Phlox and Mayweather, and Phlox is a creeper. Mayweather's just kind of there. I agree with T'Pol a lot of the times, but sometimes even she can kind of say and do stupid things. But yeah, that was episode 2. We'll see what happens to our intrepid crew and see what else they can royally screw up. But again, I'm holding out hopes that it gets at least a little bit better. But yeah. But let me know what you thought of this episode and the show in general. Like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you again for another episode of Rough Rants, and I hope you have a great night. Bye.